Several JRPG sequels stayed in Japan for many different reasons. Today, we'll take a look at some of the most desirable of them all and why they were never released overseas. Some of these JRPGs are really good and highly recommended. So let's begin! Number 10. Ys V: Lost Caffeine Kingdom of Sand. Ys V was originally released on the Super Famicom in 1995. It also got a remake on the PS2 in 2006. Neither version was ever localized. Contrary to people's belief, it is not a sequel to Ys IV, also known as Memories of Solcida, but rather a sequel to Ys III, also known as the Ode in Felghana. After the events of said game, adult Christian continues craving for a new adventure. On his travels, he hears about a mysterious city called Caffeine, which vanished with no explanation whatsoever. Excited for this new adventure, he sets off to investigate what happened. Why neither version was localized probably has to do with its gameplay mechanics. These games are known for being fast-paced, with some really cool rock and metal music. Ys V, however, has none of that music at all, and as you can clearly see right now, looks and feels kinda clunky. Not slow, but as in not like a true Ys at all. Not only that, controls are also somewhat primitive, especially compared to the original versions of Ys III. To date, only the Super Famicom version has been fan-translated. I guess there was no point bothering with the PS2 remake, huh? The top-down view was gone and the controls felt even worse. I mean, if you already had a great battle system with good controls on Ys VI, released 3 years later before on PC and on the PS2, why would you remake your game like this? I'm not glad either version stayed in Japan, but I'm not too sad either, to be honest. Number 9. Star Ocean Blue Sphere. The only Star Ocean game to ever receive a direct sequel is Star Ocean: The Second Story, an exclusive to the Game Boy Color, later remade for mobile devices. Nope, neither version has made it outside of Japan. It takes place 2 years after the events of the second story. The whole cast is mysteriously teleported to a planet with an advanced civilization, so the whole point of the game is to investigate this new planet and find a way out of there. So it is a traditional style RPG, but it's kinda comedic and not really to be taken seriously. I have no idea why they decided on a sequel for a Nintendo Portable System. Beats me, but is the game any fun? And is it fan-translated? A recent translation was done, finally, so you can now play this game in English. It's nowhere near as good as the second story though, but it offers a fun and short adventure. Views vary from isometric inside areas and top-down on the overworld. You can only take 3 characters with you per expedition and there are random encounters out there. Battles will play in 2D, but in a very simplistic and slow way. They aren't that fun at the beginning, to be honest, considering you'll come from the second story, but you can get used to the charm. The reason why this game wasn't localized is because Enix was already on its way to merge with Square, but also because the translation will be very difficult to fit in a cartridge back then. This is, in my opinion, a lot of BS, of course. They probably thought the game wouldn't be a success, considering it actually didn't sell that much in Japan. Number 8. Tales of Fantasia: Narikiri Dungeon. Another Japan-only release on the Game Boy Color was a sequel to Tales of Fantasia back in the year 2000. Supposedly, it takes place around 200 years after the first game. You now play as 2 kids whose destiny is doomed, apparently, according to an angel-like woman called Norn. She tells them to go visit Arche, one of the main characters of Fantasia 1. From what I understand, Arche helps Norn open a time portal so the main characters can travel to the past and meet with the original cast. Only the Game Boy Color version has been fan-translated and it's very rough in terms of gameplay. I couldn't get into it because the combat was so slow and boring. It had its charm, of course, but it was just very primitive. The remake on the PSP though, which we also didn't get, was much better. Now it feels more like a true Tales game and not just any spin-off. The battle system has this new interface in 2D that reminds me of Tales of Eternia, but with better controls. Sadly though, this remake has never been translated and it's practically unplayable unless you know Japanese. I'm not surprised we didn't get either version of this sequel. I mean, we only got a lazy-ass port of the original on the Game Boy Advance. We need a collection with both games for modern systems so everybody can experience the beginning of this iconic franchise. Number 7. Fire Emblem: The Binding Blade. There is a trilogy of Fire Emblem games on the Game Boy Advance, but we only got the second and third. The Blazing Sword is actually the very first Fire Emblem ever localized in the West, and it's the 7th title in the series. The Binding Blade precedes it, and it's been fan-translated for a while. I've no idea why this first game wasn't localized, as the Blazing Sword is actually a prequel to it, which makes this one a sequel, considering your main characters are the kids from the ones in the Blazing Sword. You found some things left unexplained about the backstory and lore on it? Try the Binding Blade, as it is a very good game as well. It plays with the exact same design, interface, controls and gameplay mechanics. My only gripe is that, unlike its two brothers on the Game Boy Advance, this one can be brutal in some maps. All three games have some really unbalanced missions alright, but the Binding Blade just takes the cake in difficulty. But honestly, that shouldn't stop you if you're a die-hard Fire Emblem fan like me. Number 6. Fate Extra, CCC or Triple C or whatever. Also released on the PSP, it was a different version of the original game. Fate Extra is one of the most criminally underrated RPGs on the system, but it's also one of those with almost no marketing done and barely anyone talks about it. There's an upcoming remake for modern systems this year, but who knows if we'll actually get it. Now, the plot in the Extra universe is very complex, bizarre and hard to understand and explain. So the next game, CCC, is not exactly a sequel, but more like an alternative timeline and story. I feel like if I explain it, I'll end up spoiling both games. Reasons for it not being localized are obvious. First game wasn't successful at all outside of Japan, so why bother bringing a game that isn't exactly a true direct sequel? The gameplay is the same though. You go around school, talk to people, watch scenes, read the visual novel parts, buy items at the cafeteria, etc. And when it's time to train your servant, you go into the usual virtual dungeons. The battle system is also the same, except the interface is different sometimes. The menu will sometimes be on the right side of the screen for whatever reason. Plus, you can now use Gilgamesh as your servant. No, this game isn't patched, and there's no official fan translation yet. What you've been seeing so far is a translation that I found on YouTube on the Gilgamesh route, but it isn't playable, just text images applied on the original videos to merely show the translation. So, you can play the Gilgamesh route in Japanese on your PSP while watching this playlist, maybe? Number 5. Mother 3. This is the third entry in the Earthbound series, the best one of them all according to fans, and one massive commercial success that still roams exclusively in Japan. Of course, as you can see, it was fan-translated a long time ago. It never made it overseas because it was released near the end of the lifespan of the Game Boy Advance. Man, what a sorry excuse. Something tells me its more mature themes and possible incorrect references are the real reason why Nintendo never brought it, but that's just speculation on my part. The game takes place several years after the first one with its own story, setting, and characters in the Nowhere Islands. Because the GBA was almost in its entirety a portable Super Nintendo pretty much, graphics, interface and gameplay resemble Earthbound a lot. Mechanics are similar as its battle system still turn-based, and it also revolves around a protagonist with psychic abilities. Despite having still a lot of the same style of humor its predecessor had, it does seem to include a darker shade of things plot-wise. Considering the amount of fans this little series has, I'm flabbergasted Nintendo hasn't done a single thing to bring it overseas yet.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
Number 4. Tales of Destiny 2. Another game I have no idea about is Tales of Destiny 2, also because it's never been fan-translated. Attempts have been done, but most of the fans behind the projects are pretty much AWOL. To make matters even worse, there's two versions of this game, and both remain without a translation to date. No, this isn't Tales of Eternia, which is a completely different game, localized as Tales of Destiny 2 on the PlayStation 1 for very stupid reasons. The real Tales of Destiny 2 was released only in Japan, Korea and Taiwan on the PS2 and later on the PSP. It all starts with the son of Ruthie and Stan, Kyle. He lives with his mom in an orphanage she's taking care of, but it's near bankruptcy, so one day he goes away to look for funds alongside his friend Lonnie. You know the Tales games, right? This one is no different in terms of plot. One thing leads to another and so on until it's all about time traveling and alternate realities. Yeah, hey, don't look at me, I can't understand Japanese so I can't give an opinion on the story. The gameplay is traditional like any Tales game, but the battle system is still in 2D with random encounters. It plays very similar to Fantasia 2 as a matter of fact, much like Tales of Eternia, but actually I found the controls and action to be better. The PSP version is an enhanced port, but gameplay wise I didn't notice much of a difference. Either way, I didn't make it far at all because I couldn't understand a single thing. It's beyond imbecilic that Namco never localized this, not even after the commercial breakthrough of the series in the West. I guess they decided to focus on new titles instead of losing their time with the real sequel to Tales of Destiny, which, well, sadly, didn't really sell a lot outside Japan. Number 3. Growlanser VI Precarious World. This game was finally fan-translated last year. It is the 6th and final entry in the still abandoned and forgotten Growlanser series. It takes place after the events of Heritage of War, but in another part of the world. Some characters even make cameos on it, but it does focus on its new setting and protagonist. Strangely though, the story now includes some time traveling and dimensional stuff. It sounds off and I can't give you my opinion of it because the fan-translated ROM doesn't work on my hacked PS2. Gameplay-wise, it looks and plays exactly like its masterful predecessor, a real-time strategy RPG which combines free control of the main character, becoming a hybrid with action RPG. This sequel never made it overseas because sadly, the series was never successful to begin with, at least not outside of Japan. Heritage of War was a pretty obscure release with barely any marketing done, so of course the game met disappointing sales, which made Atlus conclude there was no point in localizing this one. Plus, the series died right after this game mainly because Atlus started having some financial issues back then. I don't think the series will come back, nor do I believe this game will ever get an official English release, but at least it's fan-translated nowadays. Number 2. Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem. Another game that's been released twice and neither version made it to our lands. Nintendo has already localized the first game twice. First on the Nintendo DS almost 10 years ago as a full remake, and second last year on the Switch, but it was pretty much a straight port of the original Famicom version, and it's digital only. The second game in the series was a spin-off called Gaiden, also released on the Famicom, remade into Echo's Shadows of Valentia for the 3DS. But the real, direct sequel to the very first game, we never got it. Again, very thankfully to awesome fans and hackers out there, a fan-translated patch for the DS remake exists. And let me tell you this right now, I think it's a much better game than the original. I love the DS remake of Fire Emblem, but this sequel I loved it even more. It just has a more interesting story because you can now create your own main character. They will have a personality based on what you decide, and they'll also have their own subplot. But the main story will still follow Prince Marth on his quest to unify the continent. Gameplay feels like a slightly improved version of the first remake, but still with the same art style and graphic design. This DS remake also includes 4 new missions which are basically chapters originally released for the Satella View back then. They're very hard but still quite engaging to play. I strongly recommend this remake. I hope Nintendo decides to localize it one day, or at the very least the original Famicom version. Number 1. Valkyrie Chronicles III. As a hardcore fan of this series, I had to include a third and only Valkyria game never released outside Japan. Exclusive to the PSP, it tells the story of a Black Ops group that works in the shadows in the middle of the Gallian War. That's right, the same war that occupies the entire plot of the first game. So this is actually a prequel to Valkyrie Chronicles 2, but most of its events occur at the same time as Valkyrie Chronicles 1. It's near the end of it when it finally becomes a sequel to wrap things up. Gameplay wise though, it's like an improved version of the second game. Map design, controls, interface, and structure are basically the same, but thank goodness they included some variety in the mission objectives. Valkyrie 2 was a military school simulator, and it was very repetitive in its maps. This third one changed all of that and gave us back an actual platoon with a more mature story and better maps. I love the second game, don't take me wrong, but this one is far superior to it in every sense of the word. Unfortunately, the second game didn't do very well in sales outside Japan, which might be the reason why Sega never bothered localizing this one. They did try to come back with Revolution a few years later, and finally with Valkyrie Chronicles 4. Neither was as successful as the first game, so who knows if we'll ever get an official English localization of this masterpiece. Will these JRPGs ever be localized? Not all of them, I'm inclined to believe. Others, I'm very hopeful. A remake of Live Alive, English localizations of Trails from Zero and Azure, anything can happen nowadays. Fingers crossed some of these JRPGs make it overseas one day. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!